Hi, it's Jessi, and welcome to another turning where I sometimes talk about books. Today I'm drinking Statty McStout Face from Solace Brewery, which is fine. I forget that I don't really like stouts, or rather, I'm very particular about stouts, and this one's not bad. Anyway, it's the end of the month. It's actually exactly on March 1st when I'm filming it, and it's miraculous that I can film this quick. I don't know how long it's going to take to edit or when you're seeing it, but I'm filming it right at the start of the month. And this is my wrap up, or reading stitch up, as I'm calling it, where I crochet my book snake. Still don't have a name for this fella. If you have an idea, let me know below. I'd love it to be some sort of reading pun, or if there's a good book character you think I should name him after. So I'm gonna work on that and tell you about the books that I've been reading. Okay, let's get started then. I am actually cheating and doing my first two books out of the month out of order because I don't want to have to do two fantasies in a row and deal with what I do when I have the same color back to back. So the first book I'm stitching here is Death of the Author by Nnedi. I did not mean to stumble over that. By Nnedi Okorafor, which is a sci-fi. So this is a book, it just came out this year. I was really excited for it. I really like Nnedi Okorafor. I really like Okorafor's works. In particular, Remote Control is probably one of my favorite novellas of all time. I do really need to reread it and assess that, but I love it. So I was excited for this. I also just saw her give a talk at the end of last year, and that really got me hyped for it. How do I sum up this book? Because it's kind of a weird one. The premise is that we have an author. It's a young woman. She's I don't know how old she is. She might be a little older than I was assuming she was, because she's an adjunct professor at a university, I don't know where. She's kind of figuring her life out. She's African American, actually African American, Nigerian American. And she's kind of going through a rough time. One of her sisters just got married, and so she's getting a lot of questions about that. But also she is paraplegic. She is in a wheelchair, and so she gets a lot of comments from her extended family about how nobody's going to want you because you're like that, and all those kind of awful ableist comments. And then she's just gotten fired from her job, and she's gotten a bunch of rejections on her book. So she kind of, in a fit of kind of weird moment for her, she just sits and writes, and she ends up writing a sci-fi novel. Now, up until this point, she's been trying to write literary fiction. She thinks of herself as a literary fiction author first and foremost. But she writes this sci-fi novel, and it ends up going really well. She gets a huge book deal for a trilogy, so the book she wrote plus two others. The book gets optioned for a movie almost as soon as it comes out. Everybody loves the book. And she's really excited about it. And that's kind of where the story takes off. And we see this book she wrote, which is about these robots in Nigeria. It's like post-humanist, when people have basically gone. And these robots have they kind of recreated racism through robots, or tribalism is kind of probably a better word to use. And it's rough. Anyway, what I found with this book is that a lot of the negative reviews you will see for this is that it's not a sci-fi, it's a literary fiction. And I don't disagree. It's very, our main character's storyline is very literary. It is kind of what I think of as women's fiction, what typically gets categorized as women's fiction. It's a woman at a crossroads in her life, figuring things out. Her family doesn't take her career seriously. She's, struggling with the pressure that has come with this book. It's relationships. It's figuring out what opportunities to say yes to. But there's this cool kind of quiet near future science fiction going on which is like, when I say near future, I mean like tomorrow near future, wherein like we're seeing advancements of technology. Like there's a character in this that creates an app that is like a digital assistant, but it's like a very advanced AI. There is there's a like Uber like car service, but it's self-driving cars, things like that. And I think those were really interesting, and I think it gives a very hopeful picture of the future. I do think there is a character in it that's kind of like Elon Musk in a lot of ways, but it's a very positive portrayal, and I don't know how I feel about that character, because I don't think he was necessarily meant to be Elon Musk, but like it's hard to think of the guy with the private rocket company. Anyway, so that was a little weird. And then within it, the story she wrote is a sci-fi novel. And it's just this very meta-textual novel where the things happening in the book within the book are being reflected in her life and vice versa. And then because I've gone to talks with Nnedi Okorafor, I know some things about her personal life, very specific and relevant for this. Two things. One is that she's talked about how her family doesn't really approve of her writing career. At the talk I was at, somebody actually very specifically asked about like being a child of immigrants, like how do you get your family to be on board with the books you write? And she was like, honestly, you have to be successful, which is fascinating and really reflected in the character. And then the other thing she talked about was that she went through a period where she might not have been able to walk again. I'm not going to tell the whole story here, but I think that like part is clearly reflected. So there's this like extra layer of meta for me reading it with the knowledge I have about Okorafor as a person, or as an author. I don't know her personally, but that added a lot of really interesting intrigue to it as well. And so I just found the layers of the story really, really interesting. My main problem with this, and the reason why it's a 4-star and not a 5-star, is that I found myself way more interested in the story, the one with the robots, than I ever was in Zelly's story. And that's a little unfortunate. Like, you want to be, if you're going to do any sort of split story like this, ideally the reader is as interested in both stories. And I simply wasn't. And that's, not great. But I do think a lot of people will really like this book, and I would really recommend it. I found myself, as I was reading, trying to figure out like where in the timeline we were, and a lot of things like that I found really, really fascinating. And I also just found the ending was really interesting and leaves a lot to discuss. I feel like this would be a great book club book to sit and talk and be like, and discuss what you think happened and where things ended. And I think it would be a really interesting one. So the next book is one of 3 that I read this month for a vlog that's already been posted. So if you haven't seen it yet, check out my Reading Booktubers faves of 2024. And this is The Will of the Many by James Islington. I'm going to keep pronouncing it that way until somebody corrects me. This was a surprising hit for me. So this is a fantasy. It is the first in a epic fantasy series. I don't know how epic. I don't know how long the series is going to be. I'm kind of hoping it's a duology, if I'm being honest. Maybe a trilogy. But that is... Oh, how do I get into this? I've already talked about it at length, so I'm going to probably not talk about it for the length of the full 4 rows that I have to talk about it. But it is a Roman Empire-inspired fantasy with a magic system that's basically an MLM. And we're following Viz, who is a young man. He is actually the prince of a nation, an island nation, that was conquered by this empire. But he is now in hiding, living in an orphanage, when he gets adopted by somebody of middling relevance in the government. And the man has basically recruited him specifically to go to a school and figure out what happened to his brother. And the first, third of the book is following this as they train him to be prepared for the school. And then we follow him as he's in the school and learning what's going on, making friends seems like a generous term for it, but meeting people, making acquaintances, alliances possibly, and just kind of coming of age. It's definitely him learning some stuff. For about 2/3, 3/4 of this book, I thought it was fine. I thought this is pretty standard, run-of-the-mill fantasy. It's a little bro-y. It's fine. The world building's cool, but it's also built on such a, like, powerful, already existing thing. I don't know if I love the way women are handled. Not that women are handled, like, poorly. It's just there's not a lot of them. And it was fine. And then the last, like, 10% blew my mind, and now I need the sequel right now. That's all I'm going to say about it right at this moment. If you want more of my thoughts, including my immediate reaction to the end of this, go ahead and check the vlog. I will say it's very good. I did not expect to like it. If you, like me, have been hearing people talk about this book, rave about this book, and you're like, this seems fine, doesn't seem that exciting, give it a shot. I will say it's a little slow. It's, not going to win you over overnight. But give it a shot and see what you think after you finish. Alright, the next book I have on here is another one that was for that video. It's also another 4-star, and in this case, it's a literary. And that is Shark Heart by Emily Habeck. This is another one. Again, it's for that video. If you want to see more of my thoughts, you can go and look there. So I'm going to try to keep this brief. This book is about a man and a woman. They are newlyweds. They've recently gotten married, and shortly after they get married, he is diagnosed with this rare but common enough disease where people turn into animals. In his case, he is turning into a great white shark. And we follow them as they kind of deal with this. So it's split into 3 parts and an epilogue. The first part is all about about them as a couple dealing with this. The next part is a flashback into the wife's past, her childhood, or more her mother's life, really. Then we come back to the husband's perspective, specifically while he is a shark. So the whole book is not about that, just about them dealing with it. It's the aftermath as well. And then an epilogue, which is the wife's life afterwards. Let's see. Let's talk about what I liked about it. I thought it was well written. I thought the concept was very interesting. I liked it overall. It's enough that I'm giving it a 4 stars. Although in retrospect, I'm kind of considering jotting it down to a 3. Because 2 things. One, it really hasn't stuck with me. It has been a couple weeks since I read it, and at this point it's already like, alright, and now what? It hasn't stuck with me. And the other is that I just wish it was saying more. I wish it had affected me more. And I don't know if that's the book's fault or if it's me. Maybe I'm just really jaded. Every time I see people talking about this book, there's been quite a few reading vlogs lately with people reading this book. And every time they talk about how emotional it made them, how they cried, how affected they were. And I just wasn't. And I keep kind of going back and forth on why that might be. Is it because I haven't experienced that great of a loss in my life? Is it because I am an emotionless person? Is it because the book itself just didn't speak to me? I don't know. But there's something about that's kind of been bumming me out about it since I've read it, is that, like, apparently I just didn't get the experience that everybody else gets with it, and that, I don't know, it just bums me out a little bit. Anyway, like I said, if you want more in-depth thoughts, you can check out my vlog on that. I think I was maybe more positive. I don't know. I think I was both more positive then on it, but also my complaints were a little more visceral. So immediately after finishing it, now, like, I think maybe I was a little unfair with my complaints. But really, ultimately, this book just wasn't quite what I wanted it to be, which is I wanted it to be this deep exploration of grief. I wanted it to be dealing with loss and how do we go through this transition, and that was part of it, and I liked the parts of it that were that, but I also didn't like that it was just this vague sense of all change is inherently bad. change. Anyway, I do. You know what? For the purposes of my snake, because whatever. I don't think I'm going to change my rating on Storygraph because it was, but I do think I'm going to give this a 3 instead of a 4. It just feels like a 3. So I have one more row to stitch, and then I will be back with my first DNF of the month. All right, like I said, the next one's a DNF, which means I don't have a lot of time to talk about it, which is fine because I don't even think I got far enough in this book to tell you what it's about. So this is In Ascension by Martin McInnes. I think it's a thriller. It's sci-fi. And the amount that I read was basically a young woman, and she's got a sister, and something about marine biology or working with the ocean. Actually, I think it was more marine environmentalism, ecology. I genuinely don't know. I was so bored. That's my review. I was bored, so I didn't finish it. I think I'm doing something wrong when I switch colors because I keep losing stitches, and also the spot where I change colors has slowly drifted. So I'm doing something wrong. I don't know what, but I'm doing something wrong. Okay. The next book I read was a nonfiction. It was Horror for Weenies. I, for some reason, didn't write the author down. Give me a second. Horror for Weenies by Emily C. Hugh. So I already ran into a stumbling block, which is that I don't typically rate nonfiction. I just don't feel like, unless it's a subject I know intimately, I don't feel qualified to. Oh, I don't tend to unless it's like an incredible 5-star book. I want to scream its praises from the rooftops, or this is actively harmful. So I'm giving this a 4-star. For purposes of stitching, I'm doing 4 lines of stitching because this was really good. So I heard about this because it was on NPR's Best Books of the Year list. That's not what they call it, but whatever the name of NPR's reading list thing is. And one of my many unpublished goals for this year is to read a bunch of NPR's books. I think it's a good way for me to expand my horizons into things I maybe wouldn't have read otherwise. And when I saw this, I was immediately intrigued because I love horror novels, but I don't like horror movies. And I think the main thing is I associate horror movies largely with jump scares, which is just not a thing I enjoy. I don't enjoy the feeling of being like surprised so that my heart rate gets pumping and I jump, and it's not a feeling I enjoy. So I was intrigued by this because I do feel like, especially in recent years, horror has been getting kind of a prestige to it. I mean, don't get me wrong, there's still like campy, weird, silly horror movies, but like there has been kind of a mainstream success of horror lately. And I feel like I'm out of the conversation. So this was a fun kind of, it's a tour through horror starting with like the 60s and 70s and continuing on till more modern day, where it gives you kind of a quick synopsis of the book, well, not more than a quick synopsis. It gives you a summary of the movie. It gives you whether or not you should read it, watch it. It's like, if you like it, these things, watch. If you think these things will bother you, don't watch, which I think is really clever. And then it kind of talks about like the relevance of it. What did it do for horror as a genre? What did it do for cinema as a whole, and things like that. And I thought it was really interesting. It also deconstructed some tropes it talked about. So it was a really good resource. What I found useful from it was that some movies, like for example, the original Wicker Man, I saw her synopsis of it and I went, that sounds like something I can handle. I saw her like, should you watch? That sounds interesting. I'm going to watch it. And I watched it and then came back and read her section. Other movies such as John Carpenter's The Thing, which I just watched today actually, I read her synopsis ahead of time to be prepared and know what I was getting myself into. And I found that was really helpful. So now I've watched a few horror movies, mostly older ones. And I'm feeling increasingly comfortable with the idea of watching horror. I'm working myself up to the modern day. So like I said, I just watched The Thing, so I'm still like in the 80s. Actually, no, I watched Candyman first, so that was like late 90s. So like I'm working my way up to some modern horror. And I know things like, based on what she said, things that probably will work for me and things that probably won't. I don't think slashers are going to be my thing. But I do like a good folk horror. That kind of thing. It's been interesting and I think it's really good. I don't know that I have a lot to say. I do think if you're somebody that is a horror movie buff that hasn't watched the classics, I think you wouldn't get a lot out of this by going back and reading those first couple sections that are about older movies. I think if you're somebody like me that's interested in horror but like a little nervous about movies, you could get something out of this. Yeah, I think that's kind of where, or even if you're not really interested in horror, if you're somebody that's like interested in film history but doesn't want to watch horror, you would probably really like this. I think there's a wide audience. It also is just a really cute book. Like it's put together well. It's a nice book. It's kind of the one that would be a fun coffee table book to have that like I don't know that I would recommend everybody read it the way I read it, which is literally every night I read about 2 to 3 movies. Um, but I think most people would enjoy flipping through it, to specific movies. She also has for each movie a like books you should read if you were interested in the movie but like don't want to watch the movie. That I found was really interesting, and I added a bunch of if like I read the synopsis of the movie and I was like that sounds interesting, or I like the themes being explored but I don't really want to watch that movie, or even if I do, I could look at those books, and I added a bunch of books onto my list to read because I think I don't know. I'm getting more and more into horror, so I was enjoying doing that. I think so that in that way it could be a fun resource to somebody that both likes reading and watching horror, and maybe wants to find some more horror books to read based on movies they love. Okay, so next up we have the first romance I read this month, which was Half a Soul by Olivia Atwater, whose name for some reason I always get confused with that woman that wrote that one dark academia book that was really popular. 6, whatever it was. Anyway, that's neither here nor there. So, Half a Soul is a Regency romance with a little bit of magic. We've got like fairies, fae, and magicians and stuff. So, our premise here is our heroine. I will never remember anybody's name ever, so don't expect me to know hers. At the beginning of the book, her mother made some sort of deal with the Fae. We don't know what. But our main character, when she was a child, wandered into the Fae somehow. And there is a man there, a fairy, a Fae, who wants to collect on her mother's debt by taking her. And he fails to do so, but he does take half of her soul. And from that point on, her feelings are relatively muted. She feels things, but like her expression of those feelings is a little distant. And so we fast forward to her debut, not her debut, but she's going to London because she lives with her cousin. And her cousin has been struggling to find a husband. And so they decide to go to London where she might have a better chance. And also her sister can secretly, not so secretly, talk to the sorcier, the King Sorcier, to see if he, the kind of royal magician, can help her out. And it goes from there. Of course, she and this magician fall in love. And it's cute. It was very fun. And I needed something very fun, I think, in this moment. It was fun. I liked the world building. It's, it's London, but with this magic. And so, like, it's like just post-Napoleonic Wars, if I'm getting my history even remotely correct. I feel like maybe I'm not. And so, like, whatever it was, England was at war with France. And so we get some, like, perspective on like that, and there is fun magic elements here, and we get some fae, and it was very cute. I had a fun time reading it. I liked all the characters. There's the sorcerer has his best friend is in it, and he's a very fun character. The cousin is a very fun character. I haven't looked because I was trying to decide whether or not to continue the series, and I think I decided not to because I wanted the next romance to either be her cousin or her or his best friend, and it's not, but I don't remember now. I think it's her, like, chaperone is the next one, which might be fun too. But I really wanted it to be her cousin. And it wasn't, so. But it's really sweet. I don't have a lot to say about it. I feel like I should, but I don't. It was sweet. It was fun. I recommend it. If you're looking for, something fun, it's comp to Bridgerton. If you're looking like for Bridgerton but fantasy, that would be my recommendation. I haven't actually read Bridgerton. I could compare it to the Bridgerton show, and I think fairly same. You don't get nearly as much events, like the Bridgerton thing is all about events. And this you don't. You get a couple balls. You get like one ball. It's actually more about their charity work. Is this a spoiler? I never know. Let me look at what's in the synopsis real quick. Now, it doesn't say. There's something going on in London when she gets there, and that kind of ends up being like a large part of the plot. But it's fun. It's really fun. And I would recommend it. By the way, Half a Soul was a 4-star again. Like I said, lots of 4 stars at the start of this month. And we're not changing just yet. Or, well, we are, but not in the direction that would make my life easier. Next up is actually my only 5-star for the month. And I 5-star. So the thing is, I rate all of, I have a complicated rating system, but it involves, in my personal rating system, it goes out to the 100th place, and it's like anything from 1.00 to 5.00, and most things usually end up somewhere between those, obviously. So something that I'm saying is 4 stars here might have been a 3.88, or might have been a 4.02, right? And then if you go on my Storygraph does quarter point ratings, so, if I got a 3.88 now, I might have put it as a 3.75 on Storygraph, and so it was a 4. So, point being is that my 5 stars aren't always 5 stars, and that it can be complicated because sometimes something will get the same rating in my personal spreadsheet, but get different ratings on Storygraph, or I might be giving them different ratings now. A great example of that is right now, for what I'm stitching at the moment, a fantasy, Blood Over Bright Haven by M.L. Wang. This actually, I think, got a similar or possibly even slightly lower rating on my personal rating, and on Storygraph got the same rating as The Will of the Many. But I'm giving it 5 stars on my Booksnake, rather than a 4, because quite frankly, with the element of time added, which is what this can have an effect, I just like this one more in retrospect. Will of the Many, I think, was good. I think most of that good comes from its ending, whereas Blood Over Bright Haven, I think, is good all the way through, and it's also saying more. This is my 3rd and final, or 4th and final if you include the one from January, book from my Booktubers Favorites video, so further thoughts on this there. I will try to keep it concise. This book follows a young woman in a society. In this society, there are mages. A lot of people do magic, but like you have to study really hard to become a mage, and you have to pass a test to become a high mage. And no woman has ever been a high mage. It's like roughly every 10 years, they let a woman test. She fails the test. They move on, and they go, see, this is why women can't be mages. And then they move on with their lives. So at the beginning of the book, she's testing to become a high mage. She's really stressed about it, not only for her own personal ambitions, and don't get it twisted, she is ambitious, but also because if she fails, then that's their excuse for 10 more years to not have another woman. So she's putting a lot of pressure on herself to do well, and then she passes. This is all, the synopsis says that she passes. So there's not really all that much tension on that part. But when she does come to do research, They give her a lab assistant. Normally people are getting like grad students to be their lab assistants, and she gets the janitor. And the janitor, very importantly, is from a racial minority. He is an immigrant to the city from these people that are refugees because outside of the city, this blight randomly hits and kills people. And so he and his clan fled, and he and his niece are the only survivors of his particular clan. And that's where the story starts, and then we see them do research, and then we see them very quickly discover some interesting things about this culture and this society that really mess with our main character. It was a little predictable in that, like, you knew something was coming, not necessarily exactly what it was, but I really liked all of the themes of this so much. I love that our main character was just probably one of the most unlikable main characters I've read in a long time. She is kind of awful. Not awful in like the way, awful in such a realistic way where she is trying to do good. She thinks she's doing good, but she just keeps failing to just do the right thing or learn the right lesson. And that was hard to read, but wonderful. And there's just these themes around imperialism and hypocrisy and acknowledging the unkind truth behind the luxuries that you get. And, I think the book wants the message to be, if it comes at the cost of others, you shouldn't be doing it. I think at the very least, it's acknowledging that cost. And I thought it was incredible. I think some people, it's similar to how people reacted to Babel, I think. Although I think this one is less, it's a little more subtle than Babel. Or, yeah, I'll say that. I think Babel is very hammer. It's very much a hammer when it comes to its themes. This book, I think, has a softer touch, but it is not holding back. So I think the same kind of people that read Babel and were like, oh, everyone was racist, would have similar problems to this, where it's like, everyone's complicit in the system. So I think that's like, if you don't like it, I'm not saying that's why, but I'm saying like that's probably the kind of negative reviews you'll see for this one. It was really incredible, and I wish I had read it earlier, because I've had an e-copy of this for like a year now, and I just never got around to it because I just didn't get to it. Alright, next up, I have another romance. This was actually my book club book this month, and that was The Magpie Lord by K.J. Charles. This is a queer historical romance. I could have put this as historical, I guess, but romance is really the primary genre. It's fantasy too. The premise here is that we have Lord, what is his name? Crane. Lord Crane, who is just returned to England from China, where he was kind of exiled, sort of, because his father and brother have died, and he is now Duke, Earl, whatever lands already owning Lord title. But there's some sort of curse on him. And so he has a magician come to help him out. I'm going to use the word magician. Practitioner is the word they use in the book, who is Stephen Day. And it turns out somebody wants him dead really, really bad. Wants Lord Crane dead. Like a lot. And so in the midst of this, like, kind of mystery plot of, like, who's trying to kill, Lord Crane, I cannot think of his first name, Lucian, who's trying to kill Lucian, one or the other, they slowly fall in love. Actually, it's funny, because we just had our book club discussion about this today, so it's, like, very fresh in my mind, and I think that one of the things we kind of talked about is that it didn't really have enough time for them to fall in love, but the sexual tension between them was off the charts. But also this is a series, and so they do definitely, over the course of the series, fall in love. And some people may, consider that fine. I thought there was enough emotional connection for the start of a relationship, and knowing that, like, it continues in the rest of the series was enough for me, but I could see where that might be a criticism some other people would have. Overall, I really liked it. I think there is some horror to it, insofar as there's, like, ghosts and, the people actually trying to kill him and the other things they do. So that was fun. Fun? Fun the word I want to use? Yeah, I'll use the word fun. To see play out. And there is a good juxtaposition of the horror with the erotic. I thought was really well done. That was probably the part I liked the most. I thought the setting was, again, very interesting. I thought the characters were fascinating. Stephen in particular is so intriguing. And for him being the, like, Deuteronomist of this book, I feel like we didn't get enough of him. One of my main critiques and why this is a 3-star and not a 4-star, it's rare for a romance to get 5 stars for me. It's just, the scope of a romance novel is rarely big enough for it to be a 5-star. But the reason this is a 3 instead of a 4 is really one thing in particular, which is the relationship this book has to China. And the gist is that it's very realistic for the time period, but reading it as a modern reader, it bothered me. And I wish maybe the author had done something to address it, maybe included Chinese characters to be a counterpoint to the way it was being handled, because it came across as very, like, exotification of China, exotification of the East, which is just a thing. It's not great. But that said, I don't think it's terrible. The other thing, and just to be aware of, it didn't bother me, but it might bother somebody else, is just there's some dubious consent dubcon in it. It is very clear the characters are into it. It's just like, it veers into a territory where it's like, why weren't safe words discussed? Let's put it that way. And that's another thing that, like, it didn't particularly bother me, but I could see where it would bother another reader. Sorry, my needle got caught in a weird way. So be aware of that if dubcon is not something you enjoy, or that makes you unhappy or uncomfortable when reading it. This is maybe not the book for you. All right, my next DNF of the month, and this is a book I own, so it kind of hurt, is Robin and Her Misfits by Kelly Ann Jacobson. So this is a book I bought actually last year at the National Book Festival of the Book. They do like a state display, so like every state has like a booth where they have a couple books they highlight by local authors or books that take place in it. And I don't remember what state this was or why I picked it up, but I did. So the way this is kind of blurbed, the synopsis you get of it, is that this is Robin Hood, but a queer girl biker gang. And that sounds rad as hell. I got about like 30-40% into this book, and I was so bored. It was turning into weird sort of undercover cop. It was, I don't know, it was weird. I didn't like the characters. We have Robin, we have Little John, who's like a friend of hers that she kind of grew up with. It was like a gang they had been in together. There is a couple other characters that are in new relationship, and it's changing the dynamics of the group. And then there is another girl, Daisy Chain, who only speaks in Shakespeare quotes. And like not necessarily, it's just she like spouts like a line of poetry that has vague things to do with the situation. And there was a weird romance brewing, and it just made me uncomfortable. So I didn't like that. And I was bored, and so I DNF'd. I didn't like it. I don't know that I would recommend it. There is definitely somebody out there for this. I feel like maybe somebody that's into maybe more of like don't want to say spy movies, but that's spy books, but that's not what I mean. Or like cop thrillers. Like maybe that's the right audience for this. I'm not sure, but it's definitely not me, and I don't know what else to say besides I know it's not me. So that was my DNF. Next up, I have other this one. I have a book I pushed myself through because I'd already DNF'd 2 things. I had just DNF'd something, so I didn't want to DNF again. So this is a YA, kind of a romance, kind of a fantasy. I don't know. I'm putting it as other because of the YA seems the most prevalent to me. I would kind of call it contemporary, except it sometimes has historical moments, so I don't want to call it historical or contemporary because it's not really contemporary. You get the vibe. But it is Our Infinite Fates, and I pushed myself to read this even though I was maybe like 20-25% of the way through, and I knew how I felt about it, and I knew it probably wasn't going to change. But I had an arc of it, and I felt sort of obligated to push through. I also had just DNF'd a book, so I was like, let me give it a shot, and it didn't get better. Premise here is that it's a there are two people that every lifetime find each other, fall in love, and then one of them, Arden, kills the other one, Evelyn. And they've been doing this for like 1,000 years. He remembers their lives perfectly. She only kind of remembers them. I say he and she, that's kind of complicated because they aren't always born of the same gender every time, but like that's their first story, and the current day storyline we're following the most, that's the genders they are, so it's the easiest to refer to them as. And it just wasn't good. It was all very surface level, and there was just nothing going on below the surface. Like, it was, everything was tell, don't show. I could rant about this for hours, which is why I'm glad I only have one row to stitch to talk about it. I'll even take a drink to give myself a little extra time. And the characters are like very flat. One of the things I love about like a reborn, reincarnation, alternate timeline story is like the exploration of what makes a character who they are, even when their circumstances change, and that just wasn't there. You never see these guys fall in love. You're told they've fallen in love, but you never actually see it. We get flashbacks to all their lives, but it's either them just meeting or them at the end when he kills her. So we never see the like falling in love process. There's one timeline I think we kind of get a little bit more, but even that. And so it's just like, it was so nothing. It was just so nothing. And then I stuck through it hoping there was going to be a good reveal about why they lived these lives like this, and there wasn't. It was a surprise, that's for sure, but it was the kind of surprise, sorry, I'm trying to stuff this extra tail down, I could have never even suspected, because it involves things like so beyond anything I knew about the world. So it was impossible for me to have predicted. The next one, if you can see, I'm hooking my DNF thread again, because I DNF'd Water Moon by Samantha Soto Yambao. This is one, it was really funny. Books and Lala read it and did a vlog of it, and literally the day her vlog went up, my hold came in. And I would recommend you watch her video. She's great. She's a much better booktuber than I am. That's not even like me trying to be like shady, like she's incredible. And she hated the book. And I was like, oh, do I even want to try reading this now? But like the premise sounded good, and the things she said about it didn't really convince me that I wouldn't like it. So I was like, I'll give it a shot. You know, why not? I'll give it a shot. And I didn't like it. So I don't really know why I thought I would like it in the first place. I guess it's because the author isn't, this book isn't published in Japanese. But the premise is similar in vibe to like Before the Coffee Gets Cold, or there's the Traveling Cat Chronicles. It's that kind of book where something magical happens, but it's really just a device to explore people's lives and things like that. And it's not something I enjoy, usually. I'm sure there is a book that's an exception out there. But then it ended up being a mystery. So the premise here is that we have a young woman whose father is retiring, and she's taking over his business, which is a pawn shop where people pawn their regrets. And I actually really liked the first chapter or two where we're exploring that, where we see him buying somebody's regret, where somebody comes in and it's basically a choice in your life where you made one choice and you regret that you didn't pick the other choice. And you pawn it, and that basically erases you ever having that choice. So you can't ever sit there and wonder over where would my life be if I had done X instead of Y. And I really liked that. But what happens is the next morning, after she's supposed to take over this pawn shop, her father is missing. And the rest of the book is a mystery where she is accompanied by a man who is a professor in America, maybe Canada, I don't remember, but he is originally Japanese. I think. Yes. And I wasn't invested in the mystery, and God, the romance, it hadn't developed yet, but it was so insta-lovey, which is wild, because I saw reviews that were like, wow, I liked that the romance was an insta-love, and I was like, did we read the same book? Because, they immediately, she's like, I've never been interested in a man the way I am with him, and I just hated it. And they're jumping between these worlds that should be really interesting, but it's moving too fast. I was 30% in, and we had already gone through 3 different portals already. That's too much portal world. So I did not finish this one. I don't know. There's a part of me that wishes I hadn't read the whole thing and I knew where it was going, but also reading through reviews, most people didn't like the reveal anyway, so I'm not upset I didn't read it. Next one is going to be my horror one. What color is horror? Let me get my yarn on. Oh, no, don't do that. And then I will tell you all about the Empusium. Alright, so this one is one I almost read for that booktuber video. So if you watched my vlog there and you were like, man, I really want to know what you think about the Empusium by Olga Tokarczuk, now you will. This is going to be a 4-star, and I am putting it as a horror, although it could very easily go under historical fiction or literary. But I do think the horror part is kind of the point. It gives very folk horror, though, so my expectation for you going in would be don't expect anything to get crazy until it does. Does that make sense? I don't know. So the Empusium is about this town in the Alps where people can go if they have consumption, tuberculosis, by that point it's pretty commonly called that, to be healed. This is based on a real thing. There's a doctor that's referenced several times throughout this that's a real person that I kind of want to do a little more research on. This book is also vaguely based on a classic German novel called The Magic Mountain, which I haven't read, but I did put on my list to read at some point because I would love to see what the original story was. But we follow a young man, Wojciech, who is Polish, and has come because he has this chest congestion issue. And he's a little odd, and we get to find out why he's odd, but I'm not going to talk too much about that. And we just kind of, something's a little off in this town. And we follow him very slowly while he learns more about this town and the residents here, and specifically the other people inhabiting this men's house with him. And it is it's a weird book. It's very weird. These men kind of have the obsession with gender, and it's intentional. The men, every time they have a conversation, it's almost like a weird reverse Bechdel. Every time they have a conversation, it somehow always comes back to women. And very specifically how women are inferior to men, and how women have certain natural inclinations that are poor or make them worse in some way. And it's interesting. And this is very intentional. Like, I was reading one review that was saying that DNF'd because of these conversations. They were like, I just couldn't take one more long misogynistic rant. But that was very much the point. And there's an author's note at the end where Olga very explicitly, she says, all of the misogynistic conversations in this book were paraphrased from works published by these, and lists off like a dozen men. It is, I don't know, there's something about that felt very, I don't know, shady, but like beautiful. It was incredible. I loved it. So the gender part is very intentional, and there's kind of this deconstruction of that happens towards the end. And behind this, there is just this kind of mystery of like, people die here. And for the most part, that seems natural. Like, oh yeah, people come here with consumption. Not everybody gets cured, but also nobody ever seems to leave cured either. And we kind of get this kind of uneasy feeling. Sometimes the perspective will go into this third person plural where it's like, and we watch as he does this, which is just really creepy. If I hadn't returned the book to the library, I might grab it and read like one of those passages, because it is just very creepy when that happens. But that's very much in the background, and so it's a very slow horror. Like, when I say folk horror, like, as I mentioned earlier, I watched The Wicker Man, the original. You know, in that movie, nothing really happens till like the last like 10 minutes, right? Most of it, you're watching this guy just wander around, try to figure out what happened to this girl, and nothing really happens. But the whole time, there's something creepy and eerie, because like the townsfolk are acting weird. There's weird stuff going on. And this has that same feeling. The problem is, in the book, reading it in a book, you don't see it. So it's like you have to kind of push your mind further than the book itself goes to be like, oh, we're doing the same thing every day, and this person is and there's this creepiness. And I feel like this would make an incredible movie, because I think you could really push that eeriness and make it like really shine. That said, I do think the first part of this, before things get crazy, could have been about half the length. I think the points being made, the racism and the sexism and stuff, come across fairly quickly and do not need to continue to be pushed for as long as they are pushed. And I do think that would have improved it a little bit, but all said, it was a good book that I very much enjoyed. This is getting a 4 out of 5. And I think if it had been a little bit quicker paced, it probably would have been 5, because I really liked it. I really did. All right, another book coming up that I kind of wish I had DNF'd, but this time it was for a video, which is why I pushed through. And that video, I don't even know whether or not it's going to happen, because I'm waiting on interlibrary loans, and those are always a little bit hit or miss. And I haven't done interlibrary loans through my new library yet, so we shall see. Red in Tooth and Claw by Lish McBride. This is a Western, so I'm using my other color for it because it's a Western. It's listed as a horror, as a YA horror. I think that's kind of a misnomer. There were a couple scary, spooky scenes. I almost went with like a mystery thriller color on this one, because I do think that could have been accurate, but ultimately I think Western is kind of the predominant genre. So our premise here is we have a young woman whose grandfather that raised her has just died. The grandfather raised her specifically as a boy to keep her safe. We're never really given a very good answer on this, which is one of the many reasons I didn't love this book. And since her grandfather died and there's no one else to take care of her, she is given into the state, and the state puts her in a settlement that takes in orphan children. This is actually kind of a thing I only recently learned about, with like children farms, which is basically like farms that would take in orphan children, usually treat them terribly, use them as manual labor, and not actually take care of them. And that's kind of where the story goes. There's something creepy and weird going on. There's something a little bit culty about the whole thing. And we just kind of follow the story from there. I don't really know what else to say about it. Our protagonist, Hval, struggles there because she's got a problem with authority. But also, yeah, like I said, things are weird. It was so boring. It had like one or two good kind of actually creepy scenes. I wish there had been more of that. That might have helped a lot. But Hval is such a passive, inactive character. She very rarely makes decisions. Frequently, the things happen to her, and then sometimes she reacts. More often, other characters react for her. And I just wasn't really into it. I almost DNF'd, but then I was like, I'm doing this for a video. I should push through. I kind of wish I hadn't, because I don't know that it ever really got any better. Would I recommend this to anyone? Not really. A lot of the positive reviews, because when I don't like a book, I like to read the positive reviews, because I'm like, there's something here for somebody, surely. And so to help me kind of figure out who the audience would be. And the setting seems to be part of it. That seems to be what people like. So maybe if you're into Westerns more, this would be your jam. But it certainly was not mine. So, 2 stars. All right, next up is Paradise Rot by Jenny Hval. This is another horror, and it was a 3-star. The premise of this is we have a young Norwegian woman. She's 20 years old, so I can actually say young woman and know it's actually a young woman instead of just assuming for some reason. And she is from Norway, but she is going to England to do work, to go to university for a biology degree. She's interested in mycology. And she ends up moving in with another young woman who is in the workforce. She works for like a business. It doesn't really matter. And they have an apartment in a converted old brewery. And oh god, this book is just gross. I think I don't remember who I got who I watched that read this book and recommended it, or didn't recommend it, but like talked about this book in a way that made me interested in it, but I forgot when they talked about it until I started reading it. This book is obsessed with pee. You get so many descriptions of people peeing, the color of the pee, the sound of the person peeing. It is a lot. So if you're somebody that doesn't like that grosses them out, makes them uncomfortable, don't even pick up this book. Don't even. But it's also just really gross in its description of other things. Like, it describes food in some of the grossest ways. Like, food that is, like, intended to be appetizing, and, like, if I saw this food, I would be interested in eating it, but, like, describes it in the grossest of ways. And so it's just kind of a gross, visceral book. I think that's the real strength of this, for all that, like, I didn't necessarily enjoy the experience of reading it. I think, like, the descriptions are incredibly well done. It definitely evokes something in me, and I think that's good. I think that's what books should do. I don't know that it did much else. It's very much about obsession. It's this relationship between these two women, and it's interesting, but, like, it's told largely through, like, metaphor and inference, and I wish there had been just a little bit more grounding to it. I think my problem is that we get so little that is real in this book, and so much that is a metaphor that is implied, and it makes it a little hard to really find my footing in this. And so that was really my struggle with it. It was good, but I just needed a little bit more to ground it so that it was a little less strange. Just a little less strange. Or really, you don't need to make it less strange. I just need a little more in the book that isn't as strange. Like, there's a German exchange student there as well that our main character is friends with. Jo? Is that her name? Jo, yeah. And I wish, like, maybe we had had more interactions between the two of them, or, and it wasn't so centered on this, like, weird obsession. But, like, genuinely, it's very good, and I do I don't know the audience for this, but I really want to recommend it to people because I do think a lot of people, the right people, will love this book. I just don't know who the right people are. Because there's a scene, I want to talk about it. This isn't really plot spoilers because this book doesn't really have plot. There's a scene where our main character, Joe, is reading a book, and it is some of the most, effective, evocative writing I've ever read. So I really think this is incredible, and I don't know if Jenny Hval has written anything else. She's primarily a musician, but I would be very interested in reading more from her because I do think her writing is just incredible. Maybe I should look into her music. I don't know, but that's Paradise Rot. I don't know. It's for someone. That's for sure. All right, and then unfortunately, my final book of the month is going to be a DNF. Not a DNF because I think the book is bad. This one is definitely an it's not you, it's me situation. And that's going to be The Gilda Stories by Joel Gomez. I've tried to read this once before and bounced off of it much, much quicker than I bounced off of it this time. I'm going to read it one day. I swear, today is not that day. So this is about a vampire. It is about an escaped slave girl who becomes a vampire, and then we follow stories from her life, learning how to be a vampire, about how vampires operate. I got into the second episode, the second chapter. They're all very long stories, so I don't know how many or how far we were going to get before I decided I just could not push through. Part of this is it's an ebook. I don't read on ebook well. I'm doing it more. I might actually get an e-reader at some point. Maybe that'll be a birthday present I get for myself this year. But it's just not something I struggle to do, stay engaged when I read on my phone. So that's definitely part of it. If I could get an audiobook of this, I think I would get through it a little bit better. But it's very slow paced. This is very character. It's her just kind of experiencing things, meeting new people, and learning new things about this afterlife that she's experiencing. And it's commentary on the social elements of the time. So the book starts when America's on the verge of the Civil War. And we start with this other vampire who is tired. She talks about how she's lived so many lifetimes and she used to have such hope for humanity, and that seems to have faded and it's gone now. And that's kind of where the book starts. So it starts very bleak. And I don't have the headspace for it right now. I've at the end of this month, I had a lot of low-rated books and DNFs, and I needed something fun and light, and that's kind of what I've moved on to, or planning on moving on to. I have a thriller I'm going to start reading that will hopefully get me, it's from my future sister-in-law recommended it as something that was just fun and fast-paced, so I think I'm going to give that a shot, because this was a little too slow and a little too heavy for where my brain is right now. And that's going to be it for my February reading. It was quite a bit. I put a little marker in for my month, so I think I'm going to put a stripe or something in place to indicate where I stop, indicate between the months. And so we've got my January reading, and there's my February reading. Quite a bit more. Is it more? Similar. Definitely got some of that pink in there, though. I'm glad I could get some romance in. For some stats, I read 11 books, DNF'd 4, and my average rating ended up being a 3.5, which I'm so mad about because at the beginning of the month, 2/3 of the way through my month, the average rating was a 4.1. Those last couple books really hurt me, and I'm angry about it. But anyway, this has been an extremely long video that I'm sure will be a strange one to edit, but there's my little snake for the month. I hope you've enjoyed this. Like it if you have. Please let me know below what you think I should name this little guy. Also, anything else I might have asked you in the middle of this video, I'm sure there was something. Please, if you have tips for changing colors a little more smoothly, I don't like the way this is looking when I change colors. I mean, I don't hate it, but I don't love it. So whatever I'm doing wrong there, please let me know. And I love y'all.